All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing the game of the week in the SEC between number 6 Georgia and number 15 Tennessee. Bulldogs 3.5-point favorites. 50.5 is the total. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC from Knoxville, Tennessee. Getting started with a Georgia offense. It's been an all right start to the year for the Bulldogs, but momentum is kind of low as they're coming in after sluggish game. They beat Austin PA only 28-6. It's obviously a FCS team that they should be running up the score against, and they weren't all that impressive in this one. But Gunnar Stockton, this is gonna be his first career road start, his 4th overall. He's been solid this year. 417 yards to the air, 2 touchdowns. He ran for 2 as well, showcasing some nice legs in week 1 against Marshall. This is a guy I think he's played well up until this point so far. His couple of starts. Obviously, this is going to be a significantly different test than what he's seen so far. But I thought he managed the Sugar Bowl quite well, where a lot of stakes were on the line, right? So going to Knoxville here, it's probably not going to be that tough for him. I think the biggest question as well is for this passing game is they just don't seem to have a whole lot of great weapons. Zachariah Branch was one of the marquee transfers they got from USC. This is a guy who's dangerous with his speed and his yak in the open field. He's really effective on screens, quick game, special teams, but as a natural wide receiver, just does not seem to be all that consistent. Colby Young's probably going to be your best guy overall. Noah Thomas is not really getting a whole lot of looks so far through 2 games. This is a guy who has nice physicality. I think can attack downfield. London Humphreys out of the slot. Running back Cash Jones has been getting a couple of receptions, but of course they have 2 phenomenal tight ends in Oscar Delp. He's going to be the top one, and then Lawson Lucky as well. They're going to start opening up the offense, I think, here, Nick, against Tennessee, at least as they, spearhead into conference play. What's your confidence in this passing attack? Because last year, they had a guy that was expected to, contend for the Heisman, underperformed. His wide receivers didn't seem to help him out all that much, and those guys were veterans. So now we have a bit of a younger group here. A couple of guys who have been in college football for a while, but for the most part, I'd still say it's a relatively youthful group. They will be facing a Tennessee secondary that is a little beat up at corner, but I'm very curious to see how these guys look and who will be the alphas in this receiving room.
Yeah, I'd say my confidence is in the middle of the road with this offense right now. I feel like they've done some solid stuff, but they've also kind of not played to the level that you would hope so far playing Marshall and Austin Peay. These are 2 bad teams that they played in their first couple of games. 36.5 points per game is the total right now. Sure, some of the stats look okay, right? 5.1 yards per attempt on the ground and 7 rushing touchdowns is pretty good. 480 passing yards through the 2 games and 3 touchdowns is probably a little bit lower than you were hoping for 5.98 yards per play total for this team. Stockton, he's looked, decent right now. He hasn't made any mistakes or anything like that, but I think 417 yards through 2 games against 2 bad teams is probably a little bit lower than you were hoping for if you're a Georgia fan. 2 touchdowns only. The 70% comp rate's not bad, but they really haven't slung the ball a whole lot right now. Zachariah Branch, I think he's progressing, right? 112 yards for him, 18.7 yards per grab, and the score is pretty good so far. Colby Young, Landon Humphreys, I need to see more of those guys. Same thing with the tight ends and Dalton and Williams, who are 2 solid assets, but I've only seen a little bit out of them. Williams did have the 1 grab for a touchdown so far this season. Noah Thomas, Scavier White, these guys, Talon Taylor, these are all guys that have to step up and get more targets. They don't have a whole lot of grabs. I think this offense is still, a work in progress. They're growing. Obviously, they're confident in Stockton somewhat. Also, Kirby was seeming to push him a little bit, saying like, I want to see what you do in practice out on the field, kind of hinting to the fact that, Stockton looks better and more comfortable in practice than he does in game situations. Heading to an intimidating environment on the road may be tough for a kid in Stockton who's not played in those tough environments before. It gets quite loud up there on Rocky Top when that team is playing good football, and the energy in the crowd is certainly behind them. Keeping an eye on how this passing attack progresses and what they look like in this matchup.
The biggest thing for Georgia is, what are we going to get out of this run game in this contest so far this year? Yeah, they've been great, but last year they were also great against weaker competition. They only had 1 game of 200-plus yards, and that was against UMass. Against Tennessee last year, only 106 and 2 scores. That elite defensive line really held them in check. It's a bit of a watered-down group compared to last year, but it's still a phenomenal D-line for Tennessee. And Georgia just needs to get back to being able to run the football with authority. Of course, Nate Frazier is your lead back. Dwight Phillips, Chauncey Bowens have been getting all involved. I just don't think they're as talented as we're accustomed to seeing in the backfield for Georgia, and that's certainly leading to them being a little inefficient. And, of course, the offensive line's been lacking as well. For a group that has as much talent and size as they do up front, they should be generating a much more consistent push. And you look at the tackles. This was a group last year I was concerned with. So far this year, they've started the year well. Bo Hughley at right tackle, Monroe Freeling at left. Of course, he got a couple starts late in the year and was pretty impressive. On the interior, left guard Micah Morris has been tremendous. Drew Bobo has been very good at center. And then right guard is kind of a toss up. Looks like Dontrell Glover is going to be their top dog there, but that's really only the concern with Georgia up front. Again, Nick, they're incredibly talented, a lot of size, a lot of physicality, but we've just not seen that on a very consistent basis. Last year when they played Tennessee, the pass protection was spot on. That allowed Beck to cook downfield. And with, again, a beat-up Tennessee secondary that's missing some starters, if they can play like they did last year, they could be putting on a clinic. But I want to see them get back to running the football, and that's just an iffy, take right now. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to see them get back to running the football because that's sort of Georgia's bread and butter on offense. They've not been able to do so. The stats aren't horrible through the first couple of games. Like I said, 5.1 yards per attempt and 7 scores. But against some of those bad teams, you're hoping they're able to run the ball a little more effectively and have a solid day on the ground. When I look at this rushing attack, right, Nate Frazier, is he a guy that I'm fully confident in? I don't know if I really am. So far, 25 attempts for 116 yards and 2 scores. You need to see more out of him. Dwight Phillips, Chauncey Bowers, these are guys I need to see more out of on the ground. Stockton, he has the 2 rushing touchdowns. They're trying to get his legs involved in the red zone, certainly. This is a Tennessee run defense I think is still a really strong unit overall, and they're a unit that's still in a good spot. So I think the secondary is a bit weaker here. So Georgia, clearly the game plan for me is to attack the secondary and try to take advantage of a damaged and beat up Tennessee secondary. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. But is there enough confidence in Kirby to kind of unleash this and let Stockton go out there and be the offense and lead the way through the air? I'm not sure if I can see it. A conservative game plan may hurt the Georgia Bulldogs here.
Now we're going to move to the Tennessee offense. It's been really humming through 2 weeks. Against Syracuse, they were very impressive. It took them a minute, including, Joey Aguilar, to really find the footing, but, they really did well over the final 3 quarters of that game. And he's been fitting in quite well into this offense. A guy who did actually play Clemson last year on the road, so he's seen a big-time opponent before. He was pretty abysmal in that game. Of course, the talent at pass catcher is not up to par like it is here at Tennessee. But he's been good. He was really accurate against East Tennessee State. I thought he did a good job of putting the ball where it needed to be against the Qs, so his accuracy's been improved. Trying to get in rhythm with the offense is really the biggest question mark for him because he came in so late. And you look at those pass catchers. I think they're good, but they're not great. Chris Brazzell looks like he's finally stepping up after a disappointing 2024 season. Mike Matthews is one of the more talented guys of this group. Braylon Staley is an explosive weapon. Miles Kitzelman is a phenomenal tight end. They have weapons, right? But I just don't think they're up to par to like we've seen in the past, where this offense still struggled against Georgia, and they always have against Josh Heupel. Even with some elite talent that's in the NFL, they've just not been that good. I really don't know if these guys are going to be the ones that make a difference, especially with Joey Aguilar playing really, his biggest game up until this date in his career. I'm really concerned for this passing attack, especially since his offense can be really simplified, and Georgia's been able to do that to perfection. What's your expectation here for this pass game?
The offense has really impressed me so far this season, but you're right. In the Heupel era, 17 points last year, 10 points the year before that, 13 the year prior to that. They haven't got more than 20 points in the Josh Heupel era so far, if I'm not mistaken. So that's really not good if you're a Tennessee fan. Obviously, you want to see them be able to go out there and score a fair amount of points, and this is an offense that should be able to score points, and for some reason, they have not been able to do so against this Georgia team. That's the one team they cannot seem to get points against when it matters most, and that's a huge problem when you're coming to this matchup. Overall, I think this is an opportunity for them to maybe score more points than they have previously against a Georgia team, because of the way that the offense has looked so far through the first 2 games. I look at the stats, right? 58.5 points per game. Pretty good number there. They scored 72 points against East Tennessee State. Them and Alabama both ran up the score against their bad opponents this past weekend, which I thought was pretty impressive to see from those 2 sides. For Tennessee, 5.74 yards per attempt on the ground, 7 scores, just over 500 yards rushing total, and then 7 passing touchdowns for Aguilar, plus the 705 through the air, and 0 interceptions, I think, is the key story for him. He has seemed to fit in. Beg your pardon, Jake Merkmuller had 2 of those passing touchdowns in garbage time, but still 7 as a unit overall is pretty good. Aguilar, 5 touchdowns, 66% comp rate, 535 on the season. He's been really solid and comfortable. He's fit in the offense pretty well considering the late cycle move there, which you were kind of concerned maybe that wouldn't work out so well for this offense. They seem to be firing on all cylinders so far. 7.2 yards per play is pretty good. Syracuse defense is no pushover necessarily, but they're not one of the best units in the ACC. So can they stand up against this task? Can Aguilar look comfortable and confident in the pocket against a front 7 that is absolutely still dominant for Georgia? Can these wide receivers that have had some issues with drops and inconsistencies in the past bail them out and have a strong day?
And of course, this passing attack, I wonder if they're going to try and play it safe because they probably have a sense or a feel they can win this game being, 3-point underdogs. And are they going to be aggressive? I think this is an offense you're going to see a lot of screens, a lot of quick game. I want to see them try and, take advantage of those one-on-one matchups and push the ball downfield, take shots at them, give these guys opportunities to make plays. And that's one thing that I hope's not in Josh Heupel's head, Nick, is, we have a sense in Vegas feels like we have a chance to win. Coaches can say it doesn't matter, but they hear the noise, right? And so that's one thing that might concern me. They're not going to be as aggressive as they should be. You think it's a possibility, or is this just all smoke and mirrors from me?
No, I think it's certainly a possibility, right? I don't blame them for trying to play a conservative approach. It seems like they've kind of rolled out a conservative approach in some of these past matchups against Georgia. Maybe they look for shorter routes here and they don't trust their guys down deep. I don't know if I've seen enough out of this offense to really be confident here against a strong defense to attack them down deep. It may lead to a conservative game plan where they try to run the ball, try to hit short slants here, and that puts the team in tough situations when Georgia stops that.
Now you look at what is a deep backfield for Tennessee, one that of course doesn't have Dylan Sampson, but they do have a very nice, well-established three-headed monster, Star Thomas, the multi-time transfer. It looks like he's earned the top back role. Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis are there. I mean, it legitimately is three different guys splitting carries right down the middle, and Thomas, I think, so far has been the best, especially as a pass catcher. And the responsibilities are huge, right? Not just being physical, holding onto the football, running well and strong between the tackles, trying to play with tempo. But when it comes to pass protection as well, because this is a Georgia team, they like to mix up their blitzes, especially when it comes to the Tennessee games, in the bigger games against tougher offenses. They'll hit you with blitzes you haven't seen in a couple weeks, especially from the slot. They love those nickel blitzes, and they're great at forcing fumbles, and that's something that I hope Tennessee's aware of. I'm sure they certainly are, but the running backs, Nick, the responsibilities are huge in all three facets. Some weeks it's not as big, right, when it comes to pass protection, but against a big physical unit that's also going to draw up that stuff I just mentioned, they have to be very sound.
You wonder what the rushing attack would look like losing some talented players from last season, but I think they haven't skipped a beat at all. 5.74 yards per attempt, 7 scores is pretty good. Star Thomas has looked really good, 161 for him and 3 scores. Deshaun Bishop, Peyton Lewis have all looked solid. But you're right, though. They have an extra responsibility in blocking in this game. I think it really comes down to whether or not this passing attack can have a solid day here. Staley's, Matthews, and Brazel all step up, be strong. Each of them have over 100 yards this season. Expect a couple of targets for Brazel, who's been really good so far this season with 14 grabs. He's going to get a lot of targets early on. If he has a solid day here, it could be the key for this Tennessee offense. I just don't know if they'll be able to run the ball as effectively as they would like to.
Now, I really do like the Tennessee offensive line. Lance Hurd, I think, is really coming into his own at left tackle. Shamard Umarov at left guard has been really impressive. Sam Pendleton coming over from Notre Dame has been impressive at center. Wendell Moe's a great right guard, and the right tackle's kind of been an interesting spot for them because it was expected to be David Sanders. He's a little bit beat up, and Jesse Perry's been getting the nod at right tackle. So it's an offensive line that I think is really good, and I think it's really skilled. But they're really going to have to set the tone against a very physical Georgia defense. And we'll go ahead and move to that Bulldog defense, and it's an opportunity for this defensive line to showcase that dominance we mentioned in the offseason that just was not really there last year. Right? It was still an elite run defense, but it wasn't in the, under 100 yards per game category. It's more in the 120, 130. That's not very Georgia-like. And they still have a lot of ballers, though, and it's going to be led by Christian Miller. This is a guy that a lot of people think can be one of the top D tackles in CFB. He's yet to prove it, though. Xavier McLeod, Jordan Hall are also there. The pass rushing group for Georgia is less noted. It's kind of been like that for the last couple of years, and that's why they mixed up their blitzes. So far, the only guys who have sacks are inside linebackers because they have so much athletic ability. They're going to be blitzing those guys as well. So that's a good way for Tennessee to potentially try and take advantage of some mismatches where they're going to be able to have time in the pocket to throw because the Georgia pass rush really is not that impressive and they can throw behind the blitz. But they're incredibly physical. They're well coached. The defensive line is a group that I certainly am circling, Nick, because we want to see them get back to that dominance, right? And I think at some point they're just going to start snapping on opponents, and they're not going to know what hit them. In Tennessee, they might be the first victims.
This is a defensive line that's really not been as great the last couple of years under Kirby Smart, and they're really struggling to kind of make that huge step forward that you were hoping for them. A lot of talented pieces here, but they've not been able to get that full pressure that you would like to see. The defensive line hasn't really been phenomenal. Elijah Griffin has 4 tackles so far this season. He leads that unit. Overall, he has 1 TFL. But outside of that, these guys haven't really got a ton of tackles, ton of pressure. Jordan Thomas, Jordan Hall each only have 2 tackles. Xavier McLeod, he only has got 1 on the season so far. You want to see more out of him, see what he can do. So I'm curious to see if they have a solid day here. Like you said, that's a pretty good offensive line for Tennessee. Overall, 2.08 yards per attempt on the ground given up by this Georgia defense so far. 123 total yards given up over the 2 games, 1 rushing touchdown. So it's been a pretty solid unit, but here they're facing a tough task with 3 different backs that can really move the ball for Tennessee. How will this defensive line stand up is a big question mark for me.
And I want to focus on that linebacking core again because C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, veterans of the program, these guys are as good as it gets at playing the position. Of course, this is a bit of a complex offense they're facing, so of course they're going to have to be top-notch when it comes to getting in the calls and understanding their assignments, especially in coverage. Justin Williams and Chris Cole, 2 X5 stars. I think they were the top 2 backers in their same class last year. Have also been getting some reps. I mean, the athletic ability is off the charts for these linebackers, and that's why I think that this game is very interesting and kind of puzzling to why they're so close as favorites, Nick. And I know it's crazy to just look at one positional group and think that the spread should be higher, but these linebackers are off the charts.
Yeah, these linebacking group is a phenomenal unit. It's a really strong unit that's been good for this team. I think they're clearly the best part of this defense so far. Wilson has been phenomenal. Raylan Wilson, 14 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack for him. C.J. Allen, 11 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack for him. He's been really solid. Chris Cole, 7 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack for him. So, I mean, they've just been productive. Justin Williams, he has 5 total tackles as well. This has been a dominant unit that's been really strong here. This linebacking core is great, an elite unit that really leads the way here. Expect them to have a strong, dominant day.
Now you look at the secondary, and this was the biggest concern coming into the year for me, for Georgia, and I talked about it last year. These corners I just don't think are all that great. You know, that's why they're putting Ellis Robinson, an X5 star, in as a starter finally, but the other spot seems to be really up for grabs, and Robinson still doesn't even have that much experience himself. But you look at guys like DeMello Jones, Daniel Harris, Dalen Everett, the latter 2 are veterans of the program, but it's really an inconsistent position for Georgia. That's why I want to see Tennessee be aggressive and try to draw those one-on-one matchups. Maybe Georgia's going to opt to sit back in zone because I don't want these guys getting torched, which is certainly on the table when it comes to scheming by the offense. So I think this is an opportunity for Tennessee they can look to take advantage of because the cornerback group really has been shaky, but it's also an opportunity for Georgia to show its respect. Jonell Aguero in the slot's been a very sound tackler, really good against the run. Of course, KJ Bolden is an elite safety for them. The other safety spot's been split between numerous other guys, but Bolden, he's a great center fielder, great in coverage. He's pretty much a Malachi Starks clone, right? He departs and Bolden comes in, and he's doing great things for them. What do you think about the corners, Nick? Because I certainly think they're very iffy, and it's probably the most questionable part of this entire team.
I think it's slightly concerning what the corners look like for this team. This pass defense so far, 280 yards total given up, 1 interception, 0 touchdowns. Obviously facing a very interesting passing attack from Tennessee with Joey Aguilar under the center here. I think Dalen Everett and Daniel Harris, they've been okay for this team, but I still want to see more of them. Certainly Harris, I think I need to see what he can do to step up and be a little bit stronger here. I think, the rest of the secondary, Bolden has been really good for this team, 10 total tackles for him. Branch has been solid as well, 7 total tackles. KJ Bolden has a pass breakup as well. So this is still a very strong secondary here. They're facing a tough test. Can they stand up and win that battle? I think, they certainly have the opportunity to do so. I think they certainly trends in their direction, but keep an eye on what the secondary looks like in this matchup.
I move to a Tennessee defense that we've gotten 2 solid games to look at. Mainly the Syracuse one. They did well against the run, not so much in the red zone, but in terms of holding them in check when it comes to efficiency and generating pressure and playing with tenacity. I thought they checked all the boxes in that area. They were able to come up with 5 sacks in that game. So Tennessee, this is a team that has a lot of talent themselves in the front 7. It starts with their edge rushers, which I think is certainly a lot better than the ones Georgia potentially has coming from the edge. Dominic Bailey is great. Joshua Josephs is phenomenal. Guys like Caleb Herring and Tyree Weathersby certainly are going to be playing a role in this game as well. I'd like to see Tyree West start to get some more snaps in key games. You look at the interior, they're not as solid as they were last year. These are still good veterans of the program. Bryson Eason, Nathan Robinson, the aforementioned Bailey when he plays on the interior. So it's still a very sound group. And what we saw against Syracuse is they just overwhelmed them with pressure, a lot of batted balls. As that game went on, they started to get really pieced apart through the air. But the defense played so well early on, it forced Syracuse to play from behind, which led to some of those big pass plays. So I'm not really going to knock them too hard. This is a team that we saw last year play elite defense, Nick, and they're still very stacked up front, which is certainly going to dictate the pace of this game.
Yeah, they're certainly going to dictate the pace of the game. 21.5 points per game is probably not that great of a number, but they played a good Syracuse team in the first week, so I'm not going to totally overlook that and be too disappointed. 2.11 yards per attempt on the ground. 4 rushing touchdowns is a little bit concerning. but Georgia hasn't really run the ball effectively, so that's not the biggest problem in the world. 441 yards given up through the air, 1 pick to 2 pass touchdowns given up. I think they've been solid, right? I think the defensive line, that is, has gotten some decent pressure at times. Joseph's been good, 8 total tackles for him, 2 sacks, a pass breakup. He's been really solid. Weatherby has been really solid as well, 6 total tackles for him. I like what he's been able to do. Nathan Robinson, 6 total tackles and a sack for him as well, so he's got some good pressure early on. Bryson Eason, he's going to probably break out at some point. 5 total tackles for him and a tackle for loss. So there's a lot of good pieces here. I think they can have a solid day against what has been a weak rushing attack for Georgia, just not really lived with expectations.
Yeah, the pressure packages were just very impressive against Syracuse. You're going to see a lot of variations, I think, in this one. You look at the linebacking group. It's a talented group. I like what they have at the 1-2 punch of Arian Carter and Jeremiah Tellender. Both have been very respectable in coverage. It's mainly been those two guys getting the go at backer. They're going to have to be tough in the hole when it comes to defending the run. The secondary is the biggest thing I want to talk about is because, Jermon McCoy still recovering from the ACL. Ricky Gibson's out for an extended period of time. That's 2 starters you're down. Coming into the year, I thought it was the top corner duo in the country. It's no longer there, and we're not sure when it's going to come back at all. So it's up to Colton Hood, who's been really good in coverage so far this year. The Colorado transfer. He's been poor against the run. Thing is about Hood is they've played 2 weaker opponents, and when he was at Colorado, I was just not impressed with his coverage ability. Now he turns around and faces the Bulldogs. Ty Redmond has also been getting a lot of CB1 reps, and he's also been very sound through 2 games. Completely different test here, Nick. I talk about Tennessee being aggressive on offense. I wonder what Georgia's going to do to try and attack these corners. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of misdirection, maybe throw some trick plays. I know play action's definitely going to be in there, especially if that run game gets going. Definitely early on in the game, they're going to be looking to hit some shots downfield. Jalen McMurray has been playing a lot of safety, a veteran of the program. Boo Carter is a great playmaker, and then veteran Andre Turrentine's the guy you can lean on in the run, but he's also a little bit shaky in coverage. I was high on the Tennessee secondary coming into the year. Right now, I'm certainly low on it because those 2 guys are still missing now. I think Georgia, this is going to be an advantage for them, Nick, and they're going to catch these, defensive backs with their eyes in the backfield at some point, and they're going to hit some big plays.
Yeah, I think it's certainly been a bit of an issue for the secondary, the 2 injuries there. The linebacking core's been great. Carter's been really solid, 13 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, a sack. Been pleased with him. Spillman, 8 total tackles and a sack for him in a backup role. Jeremiah Tellender, he has 6 total tackles, a tackle for loss and a pick. So, happy with the linebacking core. The secondary, right, obviously having McCoy be out currently as well as Ricky Gibson is not good for this team, right? That's certainly disappointing to see. But I think they've held up well with their rotational pieces. McMurray's been good, 10 total tackles and a sack for him. I think he's been all right. Ty Redmond, 6 total tackles as well. He's been decent for this team in the secondary. Turrentine, Boo Carter, 5 total tackles for each of them. Certainly got to expect a lot more out of them. Colton Hood, he's going to have a really strong day here. 4 total tackles for him on the season. They're probably going to attack him a fair amount. I don't necessarily blame them if they do so. Ty Redmond as well. He's going to get a lot of targets as a true freshman, a guy that they certainly want to try and pick on, who's been decent at times, right? 6 total tackles, 3 pass breakups, a pretty good number there in that regard. But I do think it's a matchup advantage for Georgia, right? I agree with your point there. The secondary is just banged up and battered. There's no way to beat around the bush there. That's the truth of the matter. I think Georgia will certainly take advantage of that.
When we look at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons, I think it's quite even at quarterback. Aguilar coming from the Sun Belt with some experience, while Stockton so far has been playing well, but hasn't exactly proven his worth to be able to, captain this football team long term. Running back, I think Tennessee gets the nod there. Everywhere else, it's pretty clear for the Bulldogs. Wide receiver, offensive line, backer, secondary. I think the defensive line, we're going to go ahead and call that even. Any objections from you?
No, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think this is very fair. I think, maybe you give Joey Aguilar the nod at quarterback. I think that's the one that I would probably lean to right now. And maybe you give Tennessee that defensive line edge just because they've been so much more dominant so far. But overall, I think this makes a lot of sense. I think Georgia gets the advantage just clearly where they have them. I think the running back certainly goes to Tennessee.
Look at the final thoughts on the prediction. Keys to the game for Georgia: get Stockton in rhythm. And you also want to collapse the run on the interior, force plays outside. It's going to cause this offense to slow down and not play with the tempo they want to. And, that aforementioned aggression from Tennessee I'd like to see, especially in the pass game. And don't put these corners on islands all that often. I'm really not confident they're going to be able to defend Georgia on a consistent basis if they are. Prediction for really both of us is a double-digit victory for Georgia. You look at why the spread's so close, and this is a game we talked about in the preseason as a potential upset opportunity for the Vols. And why is the spread so close? Really because the Georgia offense has been, unimpressive, I guess you could say, coming off of an FCS opponent where they didn't look all that great. That's pretty much it, though, Nick. No one's talking about this defense. No one's talking about how Tennessee never seemed to really do anything against the Kirby Smart-led football team when it comes to having their offenses be some of the best in football. This is probably considered to be the weakest unit Heupel's had in years, and now we're all of a sudden expecting them to play a close competitive football game. And I think if Georgia turns the ball over, you might have a shot. But even if you turn the ball over, there's no guarantee you're getting 7 points. Even if Georgia has a colossal failure and turns the ball over twice, you're probably going to get, 6 points maybe? 10 points? I'm not sure you guys are going to be able to capitalize on those opportunities if you even create them. I think Georgia's going to find a way to run the football. I think they're going to pass protect well. And like I said, that secondary is going to have some issues. I don't think this game's going to be close, quite frankly, Nick, and I think you're probably going to agree. And one thing you pointed out to me is they never seem to win home games against anybody, so that Neyland advantage of 100+ thousand in orange doesn't really do anything for them. So, no, I don't think this game's going to be close one bit. I don't think Georgia's going to be all that in trouble, but I'll be curious if they do turn the ball over. Even then, I don't think the Vols really have much of an edge.
Yeah, this seems like a Georgia win to me. This reads perfectly. Outside of beating Alabama twice in the past 4 years in Knoxville, which I don't really want to hear about, but that's true. I think if credit where credit's due, Tennessee hasn't beat anybody really in Knoxville in a very long time. That was good. They beat a Kentucky team that was ended up being a top 15 team at the end of the season. But outside of that, they've struggled to beat the big teams at home. They just continually lose in Knoxville to the big teams. They lose to bad teams at home as well. So Neyland isn't really the type of advantage that they think it is, in my opinion. They've lost 8 straight to Georgia right now. Tennessee, they have not won 8. Georgia's on an 8-game win streak since 2017. And I got to look at those results, right? The 8 wins have been absolutely dominant. Georgia has not really broken a sweat in any of those 8 games. They've absolutely been dominant. They put up more than 30 points in 7 of those 8 games. They were really strong. They held Tennessee to under 20 points in all of those games except one where Tennessee scored 21 points in a game they were losing by 20 points in the COVID year. So this has been very bad. And that also includes a shutout back in 2017. So this has just been a lopsided rivalry. Georgia has absolutely dominated Tennessee. And I don't see why they're not going to do it again. I mean, this just makes too much sense for me. Josh Heupel's offense is not nearly as good as some of the units he had in the past, and those units couldn't score on Georgia. What makes you think this unit's going to score on Georgia? This Tennessee team, I just don't know if they have enough to get the job done. If Stockton's in a rhythm early on, if he's comfortable in that pocket, which I think he can certainly be behind that offensive line, then I have no issues believing that Georgia will win this game. I have a little bit lower scoring than you and a bit closer than you because I just think at the end of the day it'll take Georgia a little bit longer to get into that comfortable rhythm and get the job done. But I'm all over the Bulldogs here. I think this makes way too much sense here. I think they win this game. I think it's another disappointing game for Tennessee and Josh Heupel. I feel like they dropped this one and don't look good doing it.
So, yeah, for today's episode, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.